And it's a mixture.
Okay, we're gonna get going here, 5 o'clock. I'd like to call the planning board meeting of July 25th, 2024 to order. I'd like to introduce our planning board members and staff. My far right is Hank McCarl, Beverly Bookin, David Rosen, Doug Cook, Jane Ramson, Rick Noonan, the chair. We've got Alex, who is our community development director. Greg Cadamatore is remote. We've got the RKG folks with us this evening as well. Welcome. First thing on the agenda this evening is a single agenda item, which is a review of Mass General Law 40A 3A BTA Communities Zoning Districts Scenario. Planning board to review and discuss the district scenarios for compliance with MBTA Communities Act 40A and 3A. Tori wants to give us a little background before we.
Yes, so I will share my screen with a presentation, and we will pick up kind of where we left off from last week. Bear with me.
Can we turn his sound on?
Yeah.
Am I not speaking loud enough?
Too loud.
Too loud.
Too loud.
A little loud, yeah.
How about now?
We can adjust it here. Just hang on a second.
Okay.
Let the record show that Sean Henry has joined us as well. Back from the high
Can
seas.
you give us a mic check, right?
How about now? Sound good? Loud enough?
Too loud still.
Too loud.
Too loud.
Oh, I'm too loud. I'm sorry. I'll soften my voice.
Oh, no,
Okay,
now
no,
it's
now
too
you
much.
can't hear
Too
it.
soft.
Too far.
Too far. How about now?
No,
keep
more.
coming.
How about now?
More.
Louder?
Yes,
No, you're good.
Okay, we'll settle for that.
We'll
Yeah,
settle for that? Okay.
stay there.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen okay?
It's loading, yes.
Okay. So here we are a week later from the meeting held last week. Very good discussion. I think it gave us a lot of direction. I'm going to kind of jump ahead to something that we'll circle back to at the end of the meeting. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about the timeline, what we hope to do this evening, and then how things would kind of move from this point. So a fair amount of work done over the last week to really refine the scenario based on the discussion, with agreement on a scenario from this evening. That's the goal. We would then be instructing RKG and Innis to basically take the parameters that have been used to develop these scenarios and formulate the text of a zoning amendment. As you know, we have different sub-districts proposed that would have different requirements, and that all needs to be put into a draft zoning amendment, which would appear at the end of the ordinance. I believe we're up to 532, which would be very specific to define the allowances, the dimensional requirements for these various districts that have been outlined. The intent would be for them to do that in quick order. Again, we know all the requirements from how it's been modeled. So hopefully that should not be a huge task to put that together. And then we had discussed having a special meeting on the 8th. And if everybody is comfortable with the language, to review that, with giving members, time to review it and ask questions. And if everything was in line, it would be prepared as an amendment to be initiated to the city council for them to go into the legislative process. We would follow that with a third and final forum on August 28th. Which I think would give folks a great opportunity to see a presentation of the proposal before the public hearings start, so that they can be very familiar with that and will have time to review it and formulate questions or concerns that they might have in advance of public hearings. And then we've had some discussion with the city council president, P&D members, and planning board that We think that it's the best approach to have this be a standalone item in its own public hearings. So there've been some dates identified that seem to hopefully work for everyone. The 11th, and I'm blocking some of my own screen, the 26th of September, so that it's not something that appears on an agenda where there's other business of either the planning board or the city council that really kind of doesn't give it its due, an hour here, an hour there on agendas, rather than being fairly focused. And having both bodies meet at once, so that will create an efficiency of one presentation. And for the public, the typical approach to zoning amendments is, the planning board holds their hearing, that recommendation is provided, then the city council holds its public hearing. And so there's a lot of meetings to track. So we want to create some focus so that folks don't have to run from meeting to meeting on this particular topic. And if you look at the timeline on the bottom of the screen, again, I pointed out we're pretty much on target from what we developed way back more than a year and a half ago in terms of the potential timeline. And we're in that last July to October to hold the legislative sessions to consider adoption, with the goal of submitting towards the end of October into November for the actual compliance package to no longer DHCD, but HLC. So that's
Hey, Greg,
yes.
hang on, just one correction. I think you said public forum August 28th, but I think you meant August 21.
Oh, did I say 8? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. There's too many 8s on the page.
Yeah, that's
Yes, August 21st. I believe that's a
Wednesday.
Yes. So, we will certainly circulate this after this meeting. We'll update the website if this is how we track. Obviously things are subject to change, whatever, might happen. We've also identified those 2 dates for the joint hearings, and then we'll see, how things go, how much more time might be needed or not. But we really tried to create that efficiency so everybody hears everything at the same time. And then there's, joint testimony as well. So rather than having the public have to attend, this won't always work for all amendments. Obviously there's things that sometimes will just run its course with separate hearings, but for this purpose, with the timeline, I think it makes a lot of sense to create this efficiency. So for this evening, based out of the feedback from last week, there's been some additional modeling work done. One point was, let's see the full R5 for comparative purposes in terms of its capacity if it were zoned. As Eric goes through that, there are limitations. We've already discussed that, we won't be able to zone the entire R5 in any scenario because of some of the exclusions, some of the things that we chose to avoid beyond the exclusions that the state already provided, including the floodplain and historic district areas. But really kind of looking at, what could be done and what does that look like in terms of capacity. Then we'll have Eric recap last week with some minor refinements. Again, that was a fully compliant scenario, so it's something that will work and that could be developed into an amendment. But then there was also a lot of discussion about refining that even a little bit further to try to expand the opportunity within the R5. And it's certainly something, once Eric kind of walks through the different requirements, it's beyond just exclusion. There are methodologies that were provided from the state in their guidelines of what you actually can't do. Again, this is going to, compel 177 communities, to zone for multifamily, but the modeling tool it doesn't always necessarily, produce the best housing policy. I think there are some things that we certainly would have liked to have done differently, but they just can't be modeled the way that we would like to. So he'll go into some detail into that, and then show you the refined scenario, which continues to include areas in both station areas, and what that looks like in terms of capacity and meeting all the requirements. And then we'll pause there for discussion and see, you know, if hopefully we've hit the mark, and then recap with timeline and next steps. And so, oh, that's the wrong meeting date. Where is it? Was that the 18th last week? It was. Wow. So the takeaways were, you know, again, looking at the R5, really trying to refine it based on the walk shed. You know, there were certainly some comments about how it seemed to be, you know, kind of shifted or weighted towards the west. And there's a lot of reason for that. And we have a really good visual that will give you an understanding of the limitations of what can be done, given the excluded areas, the undersized lots, and some other factors for how you can create these districts. But essentially that half-mile radius is pretty proximate to the walk shed of 5 and 10 minutes. So that's been, you know, almost maybe a better guide for how this scenario has been refined. I mentioned we'll show you the full R5 and what its implications are and how it can't really be used for a variety of reasons. The West Gloucester Station, we kind of ping-ponged a little bit towards the end of the meeting about creating some more capacity in that district, potentially with the lowering of the lot size to match the distribution that's there now, and that's been done. And then we've always we've continued to include the Maplewood Willowwood district, as well as the Halyard Gloucester crossing, if that's allowed by HLC. We've kind of petitioned them, and we're waiting to get some feedback on that. It seems like it would make sense, certainly to me. Again, here's the kind of diversion between, you know, good policy versus what the model will allow. And then lastly, in the interim between the last meeting, we did have an opportunity to sit down with David Holden again, really have a, you know, really good discussion about the housing authority properties and some of the things that they're looking to do in a variety of locations. And we're very confident that what we've arrived at for the Willowwood district will provide them the flexibility for, you know, and maybe broader flexibility, you know, that they will be able to utilize as they think about that site. And Eric will go through what you know, what's been used to model that, and I think it's a very modest change that will really, you know, again, create some opportunities for them to consider going forward. So with that, I will turn it over to Eric to start walking you through the various things that they've kind of, you know, cleaned up a little bit in terms of the things that were discussed, and see where we arrive with what your reaction and response is to the refined scenario.
Did you have a question for Greg?
It just had to do with the timeline, which was, the requirement is we have to have the application in by November. Does it have to be approved by
No,
year
it
end?
does not. We actually have until December, but we've always kind of given ourselves that, you know, when we
Breathing
looked
space.
18 months ago, we said, you know, let's parse this out into these kind of action stages so that we get to that finish line.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Where's yours?
Great, thanks. Hello, everyone. Eric Halverson with RKG Associates. Also joined tonight in person by Allison Christensen from RKG. Allison's been doing pretty much everything in the background. So hopefully any technical questions we can tag team tonight. We wanted to start based on your request at the last meeting with just looking at that sort of all contiguous R5 scenario. And I just want to take the planning board and anyone who's listening online tonight back several months now, I don't know, 6-8 months, however long it's been at this point, to sort of where we kind of started when we were kicking around ideas and also coming out of that first public forum and information session where we asked people to identify those districts. Coming out of that meeting, as folks had identified districts kind of all over the city, of course, including R5, we started working with staff on, you know, when we model, we have to assume some form of zoning parameters in the model, some dimensions and heights and lot sizes and things like that. And at the time, because we weren't 100% sure which districts were going to sort of make the final cuts, and also what zoning to apply to them, we had just started with a base assumption like, okay, let's see what happens if we just apply the R5, because we know we're gonna do it in the R5 where it actually exists, but let's apply it to the other places where it might be R10 or R20 or some other version of residential zoning, just to kind of see in the interim how that worked out. So as we went through that process and refined district boundaries and narrowed them down to things that definitely didn't make sense versus things that did make sense, we continued to work with the dimensional parameters of the R5 district. And as we started to refine that, and when we showed the R5 scenario at the second public meeting, we were still working under the assumption that we were going to apply R5 zoning parameters to the different districts. As we came out of that second public meeting, continued to work with you all and with staff, I think we realized in the actual half-mile radius around the downtown station in that version of the R5, that the 3-family really was the preferred sort of building structure typology that it seemed like people really wanted to go forward with, at least in that immediate half-mile area.
I have a question on that.
Sure.
When we talk about 3 stories, what about our height limitations? Is that within, what is it?
Frank, Hank, I think we'll get to that later.
Oh, I was just,
Yeah, because,
Yeah.
go ahead.
We definitely will get to that later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay, fine.
Yep. But right now, everything's just at 3 stories regardless of whether it's 30 or
Oh, okay.
35. We'll get to the actual height later.
And 30 feet.
Yeah. So as we continue to refine, recognizing that the sort of classic triple decker or 3-family seemed like what R5 wanted to be going forward, we needed to introduce that limitation in the model where it didn't exist before. What was driving the unit capacity before and the density was primarily the 1,000 square feet of lot area per dwelling unit. So technically on a 5,000 square foot lot, you could support 5 units, or on a 6,000 square foot lot, you could support 6 units. So when Greg flips the slide here in a second, we'll see what happens when we actually apply a 3 in the model. We can say, no matter what, if you have, well, in this case, 4,000 square feet of lot area, like we talked about last time or higher, we're just limiting you to 3 units. We can do that in the model. It's a part in the model. And before we didn't have that on because we were just testing like, what is the capacity? What is the density? So when we applied the 3-unit scenario to compliant lots over 4,000 square feet, this is now what it looks like. Before, I think we're in the 5,000 unit range. Now we're just shy of 4,000 units. So we're still 1,800-ish units over the state's minimum capacity. But you can see what happens to density because we're now restricting the number of units on a compliant lot. So we actually far exceed the unit capacity, but we run into the issue with density. As I mentioned the last time we were together, for better or worse, in a more tightly gridded urban environment where you have more right of way, public right of way like here, and you also have a bunch of excluded land, whether it's publicly owned or it's open spaces, cemeteries, those kinds of things, which are in the green, and plus the floodplain. You start to really, and you draw the districts, you have to add all that in, but it doesn't drive any unit capacity. So between the rights of way and areas that we have to incorporate that are excluded and introducing the sort of triple decker building structure, it drives the density down below our 15 units an acre. So sort of that's where we land with the R5. The other challenge with the R5, Greg was kind of alluding to this in his opening remarks. There are specific within the MBTA guidelines that the state put out. They give consultants or whoever's drawing the districts also guidelines as to how those districts can and can't be drawn. In some cases, smack in the middle of the R5, the cemetery there just north of Derby Street is a great example of that. That sits in the middle of an R5 district. We are technically not allowed to exclude that because you're kind of playing games with the law by drawing essentially around it, even though everything that surrounds it is technically R5. So the state would likely look at that and they would say, I see what you're doing. You're purposefully excluding something that doesn't drive unit capacity to bring your density up. And they basically said, hey, in the guidelines, you really can't do that. So we kind of have this issue of, we don't meet the density, we have a bunch of excluded land, and we need to be very careful about how we draw the district. So just wanted to kind of lay all that out, and also just say, as we continue to listen to public feedback and certainly your feedback from the last meeting, we continue to try to refine this and try to meet the goals of the city, of the planning board, in a location that has some challenges, not that they can't be overcome.
Just a
So,
quick question,
yeah, me
Sorry,
too.
go
Go ahead. No?
but just a quick question to clarify. So are you saying that the state specified excluded land that is contained in this district, that acreage, even though it's excluded, still counts towards the acreage if it's included?
Yeah, so if it is encompassed within the boundaries of the district that we draw, yeah, we have to take that as part of our acreage, and therefore it affects the density.
Even though the state says by their own definition, it's excluded from your calculation?
It's excluded from the unit capacity calculations, but not from the acreage and the density.
And the same, I guess, would hold true because I'm assuming the cemetery is city-owned property, which is excluded land. But even though the state says it's excluded from the calculation, it's not excluded from.
Right.
Oh, don't lose that slide, Greg. Can you go back? I just want to restate to make sure we're all on the same page here. And you correct me if I'm wrong. This is the entire R5 minus the historic district, minus flood zones, minus Railroad Ave, which is not part of R5. And the dark red is excluded lots because they are under 4,000 square feet. And what this tells us is even if we tried to do the entire R5, we would come out very short on density. So it's not really a viable scenario.
That's all correct. The only thing I might say, and Allison can correct me if I'm wrong, is the historic district parcels are technically, I think, on this map. But in the future scenario, you see, we've excluded all that, but just if
Okay.
we're looking purely at the R5,
Yep.
that is the R5.
Okay, and
yeah.
the reason there are some white areas there is because they're not in R5, even though it's very easy to imagine that the whole downtown, I'm using air quotes for people who can't see me, is R5. That isn't really true.
It
There
can
are
be,
big areas
Neighborhood
of,
business, there's different
Right.
zoning districts in there,
right,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Cemetery is actually R20, right?
Beverly.
342.2 gross or net acres.
So the gross is the district acreage, the net is the 340, the district density denominator.
It's net, yeah. And that's, you have a decline of only 2 acres after taking all the streets out? I mean, am I misinterpreting the definition of gross? That makes sense to you?
So you are not, the way that the boundary is drawn in this map, we've tried to creatively draw it to exclude some of that land, even though recognizing it's difficult to do from a, like the legal perspective. We've done that here.
Yeah, but I get that, but isn't gross also include streets?
So not in the, it does, the gross does, but we don't have to take out the streets in the density denominator. So the streets are technically part of that density denominator. The only thing that gets taken out of the density denominator is the excluded land layer,
Gotcha.
which,
All right,
yeah.
thank you. I
sorry.
got it. That'd make a lot of sense to me that you have to calculate density on gross as opposed to net, but,
Yeah, no,
all
I
right.
hear you.
Because that's
So
normal.
so Beverly, when they were creating the guidelines and holding information sessions and comments, that was kind of the number one thing that really, really bothers me about this, because we can know very clearly, and we've started all these discussions with a 3-family is 27 units per acre zoned. And by the way that they've set this up with gross, as Eric's pointed out, we're penalized for all the right of way. And I mean, it's not how you usually would go about these things. And so that small delta of 2 acres, as you kind of look at this map, what Eric has done is, those green areas, Burnham's Field and the cemetery, they are zoned differently. And he has, just assessed based on what's around like the perimeter of the cemetery, for instance. But when you see, if you look in the Centennial area, there's these little green inclusions, and those are excluded, but they are zoned R5. So that's where that small delta is. But otherwise, if you had just blanketed over a larger area, again, something like the cemetery would really be a negative on units per acre.
Well, but I mean, the streets is 20%.
I know.
It's huge. Yeah.
So, okay, it doesn't matter. I mean, we can't change the rules in the middle
Yeah,
of the game.
unfortunately, no.
It's bad planning theory. Just wanted to say that, it's bad planning.
I second that.
Okay, forward. Yeah. Does that make sense to anybody?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah,
that's a great,
Okay.
it's great to know. Thank you for working on that, Allison, or whatever, and figuring all that out for us.
Perfect. So now we'll just recap of last week's compliance scenario. Okay, so this is what we talked about last week. This will look familiar. The map on the right is highlighting the 4 districts that we discussed. So the biggest district, Centennial Avenue in Madison, the yellow district being the Chestnut Street. Number 3, the kind of pink district in the middle of Maplewood, and then number 4, the Halyard, which is the bluish purplish district to the north. You can see just again, that comparison of the number of units here by district, what actually exists in each of these districts physically today on the ground, the 1,755 units. When we model all these under the zoning parameters that we used, so R5 for the Centennial and the Chestnut Street, and then a little bit higher density at about 40 units an acre, I think for Maplewood and Halyard, we get the 2,344 units, which is more than about 50 or 60 more than we need. And then just the potential new units again is just looking at 1 to 3 unit conversions, 2 to 3 unit conversions, and then anything that might be above and beyond in Maplewood or Halyard based on the zoning that we might apply there.
Okay, and for people who are watching, you do not subtract 1,755 from 2,344
No.
because it will not be 994.
Correct.
Just so people know that
Thank you.
that column is an independently calculated column.
Yes, thank you. So we have the potential for new units of 994. Okay, so that's where we landed last time we met. Then we just shift over to West Gloucester really quick. This is all the same from last time. We're calculating on an 8,000 square foot minimum lot size last time. So you can see in the map, the sort of darker red parcels are those that are undersized, so under 8,000. The yellowish orange ones are the ones that are over. So when we run the model there, we get 93 units. There's 52 existing, and then again, completely separate calculation, but it would be a result of a net new units of 54 there.
And net new units of 54, assuming what was the minimum lot size assumption?
8,000
Right.
square feet. minimum
So you're
lot.
excluding any lots over 8,000?
Correct.
Okay. But then the colors don't make sense.
Any
No,
lots under 8,000.
Under eight.
Oh,
Excluding under,
Yeah.
yeah, okay,
Yes.
sorry.
Yeah.
Did we talk about going to 6 there or not?
Yeah, we'll show you that.
Oh, great.
Yep, That'll be in the
Thank you.
refined scenario.
Thank
Yep.
you. So this is what we looked at last week.
Exactly, just as a
I
reminder.
thought I saw a different one that said 6, yeah.
And then this is just the recap of bringing in the 4 districts in and around the R5 and then West Gloucester. We get to 2,446 modeled unit capacity and a density just over 15 at 15.15. We're right there with the density, but a little bit over on the units. Okay, so taking your feedback, which was extremely helpful at the last meeting, and trying to reflect that in an updated scenario. I think the one big thing that we heard from that meeting was looking at that walk shed, thinking about the R5. How do we create a little bit more opportunity in the R5 in the half mile? We started to look at, okay, what other parts of the R5 didn't we have in that compliance scenario from last week that we could try to bring in to, just add some more opportunity here for, property
Equity,
owners.
equity.
Yeah.
Not just opportunity, equity.
Yep. This map shows everything in red, which is effectively what we have considered to be excluded land. That is both state excluded land, parcels that are under 4,000 square feet, zoning parcels that are zoned anything other than R5, so all other zoning districts that fall within that half mile, excluding historic districts and excluding floodplain parcels. Miss anything? Okay, so to make it simple, so we didn't show you 18 different layers of all that, we colored them all red. Everything in that kind of yellowish, brownish tan color is R5 parcels, not in the floodplain, not in the historic district, and are over 4,000 square feet. So essentially, those tan parcels are what we have to work with. So you can see that as Allison has to draw districts, it becomes complicated very quickly because the more of that red we include, the less of it we draw unit capacity from, therefore it brings our density down. So we have to draw the districts really carefully and with a lot of thought so that we can balance units, acreage, contiguity, drawing them in the right way so that we don't violate HLC's laws, all that stuff. So let me just show you. So remember this image, this kind of image here as Greg goes to the next, because then you'll see how we tried to fit that in.
There it is.
So we've really tried to balance this and fit it in. So we were able to kind of refine Centennial a little bit more. Prospect, I think, largely stayed the same. We brought in as much of kind of Trask as we could in that pink area, the light pink area, I should say. Maplewood, the purple in the middle stayed the same. And then Halyard up to the top and that lightish blue stayed the same. So the biggest change was really bringing Trask and trying to get some of more of that sort of equitable approach to the eastern side of the half mile radius. We looked at bringing in some other areas if we could, but because of the exclusions in some of those remaining districts, it brought the density down. We are cutting it quite close right now at just over 15. So any small changes end up having an oversized impact. So I think collectively between staff and RKG, we feel like this is about where it can be. I really think so.
You have the unit count?
Yep, we'll show you that. Yep.
By the way, I just want to say that this extra layer
Yeah.
then really clarifies.
It's really
agree.
helpful.
And so you didn't have it before,
We
but in a
didn't.
presentation package, having it and then superimposing the areas that are left after you take everything out really makes sense and
Yeah.
hard to challenge.
Yeah, wish we had thought about this one months ago, but hindsight is what it is. Okay, Greg,
We got there. That's the important
Yeah.
thing.
definitely.
And you'll do it, the next city you'll do it.
That's right. Okay, so this just shows, just for a clearer view, kind of what we're left with those districts.
I think it's important to. Everybody's been focused on unit count, right? And what the last two slides really demonstrated, based on exclusionaries, exclusion, everything, is that the detractors within the districts are the red, right? And so when you talk about fine line, we, 15 units per acre, we've already got that on our books, right? But in this model, it was very difficult to get to, right? And that becomes the driving story, not the 2020, the 2270 or the 2400 units, it's the density, right? And it's a little bit more nuanced. Nobody's having a density discussion, right? We're having a unit discussion, but that's what's really driving this exercise at the end of the day.
Exactly.
And I think if we can amplify that point, as these presentations move along, to drive that point home, right? I mean, we're walking a fine line. We can generate as many units as you want. We can't get to the density.
Another thing that I think we don't necessarily need to make a big point of, but that so we know, is that if we calculated it based on net acreage by being able to take out streets, because they're not developable, our density is really quite a bit higher. This is a paper exercise where one of the parameters set by the state puts us at a disadvantage in terms of calculating. So it may come out 15.15 on the, but in reality, it's probably closer to 22,
On a
maybe.
lot by lot basis.
It's probably 22, 22, or maybe, so that we know that in fact, this has a positive impact in a way that just isn't part of the story, necessarily too confusing to explain, but at least we know
Yep.
that it's a sounder foundation than it may appear.
Agreed.
Just quick question for clarity, particularly for those folks watching from home. See, like your Chestnut Street numbers, 339 existing units, 249 modeled units, the potential for 71 new units. My assumption is that that's based on the fact that there are greater than 3 family homes currently on the ground in that neighborhood that would not be allowed under this scenario. So therefore, what is modeled is actually less than what currently exists, and what could be new is lesser number than what currently exists there.
Yeah, so in addition to there potentially being existing buildings with more than 3 units, you also have undersized lots, which currently have units on them, and it could be a single family home.
Right.
But that's also gonna be in that 339 units, so it's probably a combination of both.
I just want to make sure. 'Cause
Yeah.
It's difficult, I think, for people who don't understand what's on the ground, but to see what's existing, and they don't understand the zoning that's in place. See that the number of units that are existing can be far greater than the number of units that would be allowed under the zoning.
Yep. Yeah, and it's kind of funny because in a scenario like this where we're talking about a already fairly tight knit area with smaller lots, like by making these kind of as of right changes or potentially lowering the lot size to 4,000, the opportunity may not be with the 339. The opportunity is really with with the 71. You are truly giving some percentage of these lots an opportunity to do something different. It's kind of it's a great approach.
And again, just for clarity, we're not looking here at 4,000 square foot model. We're looking at 5,000 square feet.
We needed to do it at 4,000 to get the density up. Yeah.
Create more opportunity.
Yeah.
So
I
can
think
you,
from a presentation standpoint, however this is presented, explaining the differences with each of those columns is going to be really important for the public.
Yeah, I know. We'll have to really think
I
through.
think that the main thing is that 1, 2, and 5 are your 3-family, generally lower density zoning districts. And then Maplewood and Halyard is where you see the opportunity for a little bit more housing that would also support deed restricted affordable housing on a high level when we're talking to the public. Well, right now we're talking to you and you want to see everything, so.
well, we're talking to the public too. So, can you just make a statement about the 4,000 square foot lots? Just summarize why we ended up at 4,000 square feet here?
Yeah, I think as we've talked about all along, there are a lot of undersized parcels in the
Currently
R5.
existing.
Yeah, below 5,000 square feet. So in talking with staff and thinking about how to open up more opportunity, also just making sure that we're capturing fewer non-compliant lots, which as we just talked about has an impact on both unit capacity and opportunity. Just the 4,000 was a great way to open up a lot more opportunity by now I'm an outsider, so I say it's a small change. I recognize not everyone feels that way, but it's a small change because you already have so many 4,000 square foot lots that, you're again, just opening up more opportunity.
And it also mitigates scenarios where somebody would think that they could use the zoning but can't because their lot's non-conforming.
Right. So just to restate, that means that if you have a single family home on a 4,000 square foot lot that's otherwise non-compliant, but maybe let's say fits with the setbacks and everything, you can change that to a 2-family or a 3-family because it's a 4,000 square foot lot. But it does not mean that you can create a 4,000 square foot lot because the zoning for dividing lots divisions in the R5 is still
R5.
5,000 square foot. So it just means that we can use the currently existing 4,000 square foot lots in our calculation to help with the unit, the density number, mostly the density number.
Is there any way to model, to assess, show how many units on both 4,000 above square foot lots within this district would be compliant with this square footage, but are not compliant in terms of existing structure on the site for setbacks? Because again, I think we talked last week that in reality, even if we lower the square footage requirement to 4,000 square feet, the vast majority, if not 100% of those existing dwellings on the 4,000 square foot lot are non-compliant in terms of setbacks and other requirements. So they would not be a by right exercise of expanding to a 3-family. It would still be required to go through the ZBA process. Because I think that's sort of a key factor that a lot of people are concerned about, the number of actual by right uses where my neighbor can go to 3-family with no public review of the process. My estimation, again, just living downtown, walking around downtown and having been on the planning board for a long time, that the vast majority, well, again, probably 100% of the units that are on non-compliant lots are non-compliant structures currently. And probably a majority of existing lots or existing dwellings on even a compliant 5,000 square foot lot are non-compliant. So the actual by right use of this zoning change is infinitesimally smaller than the 1,027 potential new units that you're talking about.
Two things. Having said that, if a existing structure is non-conforming, chances are you cannot put 3 units on it by expanding horizontally. You've got to go up. You cannot take an existing unit and put 2 stories on it. You've got to tear it down. And the new building can then meet those requirements. Am I generally
Yeah, it's-
speaking?
If it's a tear down, then yeah, you can meet setbacks.
Well,
But if
you're
it's a
required to meet.
conversion of the existing building, then what Sean's talking about.
Right,
is the
but
case.
most existing buildings that you'd have to convert within that existing footprint, you couldn't
Yeah.
add. So in fact, in order to get from 1 to 3, almost by definition, you need to tear down and then you're forced to build at the setbacks in place at the time you get your building permit. But the second thing is this meets the equity issue because while we have to have smaller areas because of all the red, we're expanding the number of homeowners who can exercise this option if they choose to. And a smaller lot, it's a bigger challenge and may not pencil out for them, but at least on paper, we offer them. And so it meets your concern about equity.
Not
Or,
completely, but
but to a point, better than
Much more
before.
convinced. We're sneaking up on it.
all my horses are dead.
Yeah.
Can't beat them.
I had a thought about, educating when we're putting this before public of explaining the scenario of going to get a building permit. So they understand what it means to be compliant, non-compliant, what the different paths are if that happens. So I think it's just something that people need to understand, how that works.
That's a great
exactly.
idea, because actually special permit is part of that and as of right is also part of
Yeah,
that.
so you just say,
that-
this is as of
Yeah.
right, and you are conforming, you
Yeah.
know, and you give them examples, this
Yeah.
would be non-conforming,
That's
this
a
would be
great idea.
conforming. And then it's very understandable what everyone's talking about.
Mhm.
Also,
But
because
Sean
Sean
makes a
makes
great
the point that this is creating an opportunity for you. You can use your property, you have more options.
Gets to the equity issue.
Great.
So then, Beverly, here's what you were asking about before with the 6,000 square foot lot size, minimum lot size. So in the model, we tested going from 8,000 minimum lot size down to 6. So in the modeled units, we were at 93 under the 8,000. we increased that to 117, so we do pick up some extra units by doing that, should you wanna pursue that strategy. And the map on the right just illustrates in the darker reddish color, that's the undersized, so under 6,000 square foot lots, the yellowish is the over. So we do pick up, would that be about 24 more units there, so at least trying to get a little more spread there than before.
And that has to be a minimum of 5 acres, is it not?
Correct.
And it is a minimum.
Yep.
So this works in conjunction with the R5 scenario.
Yep. Yeah, we'll show you the summary table in a second.
What is it zoned, by the way? What is the west?
It's currently zoned R20, but
R20.
to model this, we used R10 standards just to bring it closer to the minimum lot size.
So would that require a rezoning, a map amendment?
So it'll just be an overlay again.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. I got it.
So just really quickly, these are the points that we focused on from last time and what we used to sort of refine this scenario. So everything that we've kind of talked about before. And then here is just the table, just simplified table on the left with the acreage, the final unit capacity when we bring both station areas together, 2,721. So we're about 500 units above the state's minimum of 2,270.
And you do want to have a little wiggle room in case the state
Yeah.
kicks it back.
We definitely do.
And this includes Halyard and Maplewood as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
Even if it's all accepted, we could make a case for it being all accepted. I mean, just because 2270 is the minimum, we can argue this is our best effort at the optimum,
Because not.
rather than backing
Yeah.
500 units
Well,
out.
as Rick was saying, it's not just the unit capacity we have to do, we have to do the density.
Right.
And we're just
Just
at there, and so we have to balance them both.
Just going back to my question, is there any easy way to identify?
it's not easy. No, it's really not easy.
I don't even know if we have that data.
Yeah, we would need a database in order
Yeah.
to do a spatial join of like all the buildings that are non-conforming.
Right.
It's beyond, I think, what we can do, right, with what we have.
So the challenging thing is, we have planimetric data, but it's all based on a photo interpretation. So you are definitely going to be in a situation where you may under or overestimate the position of a structure on a lot. You'd have to have a lot more detail to be able to do anything conclusively.
Would there be any way to go through prior DBA applications for zoning relief to compile, not for the entire zoning districts, but if we pick, say the yellow Prospect Street area and to just focus on that so that we could then communicate to city council and the public that even though we're advancing this idea of lowering the square footage down to 4,000 square feet and allowing this by right use that's based on historical data, whatever percentage of these lots and more specifically the dwellings, existing dwellings in this yellow district are non-conforming. So even though it represents or what the number is, but even though the theoretical by right use is 200 units, the reality is that those structures are non-conforming. So the by right use actually comes down to 15. It could be, because I think that's closer to reality based on what's on the ground.
Yeah, I don't think we would be able to do that, but maybe taking the suggestion of just walking through some different scenarios of what would be allowed and what's non-conforming, we could get across that point by just showing the example of, in this situation, if you want to convert your existing structure, but you don't conform to the setback, then you wouldn't be able to use by right. So I think we could demonstrate examples of how it would work out differently to make that point, to your suggestions.
I think that That's an idea, given time and everything. I'm not sure how beneficial it'll be. That's something for people to think about. But what we could do is after the ordinance with the new standards is put together, to do a model of what a threeplex on a 4,000 would look like that meets these standards, would give people a better idea of what a 4,000, that it's doable, without getting into the complications of whether your existing development is non-conforming or not. I just think that that would be more helpful for people to visualize than it would be to go through this exercise, which is kind of complicated from a planning standpoint, and most citizens would get it anyway, but just another way of looking at it. And by the way, looking at that, if you took out the streets, the real density is about 20% higher, I would think, right? Maybe 20, 25. So we're really looking at about 18 as opposed to 15. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, might be even higher.
Might be higher.
But I'm not sure that's a fact, I'm sure that's reassuring.
No, I'm
Yeah.
just saying to everybody.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's part of the package.
Yeah.
But it's because of this, not taking the roads out, the density calculation is about 20 to 25% lower than it would be if you could take the roads out. I'm just saying.
David?
Is there, for the West Gloucester, is there an equivalent map that shows the kind of, that map that you showed us for downtown of the red areas that were out? Is there an equivalent map for West Gloucester or not?
Did you make that, or I know
No, but
we could
we
easily
could,
make
yeah.
it,
For
yeah.
consistency
Yeah.
sake, I think in terms of
Yep.
presentation.
Well, I guess the point there is, we were kind of teasing apart R5 from all other zoning districts, and there it's a different zoning district, but I think we could kind of do something similar to show, I mean, the green is pretty compelling. I mean, that's all of the excluded area, but we could try to, make a similar map. In terms of what Sean had alluded to and Beverly, I'm not going to promise anything, but I think, as the presentation is made for the actual amendment in the public hearing process, we're obviously going to be, kind of borrowing a little bit from each of these presentations and iterations. And I think one that was a really good one is when we had a lot of photographs of existing structures, how many units were in them. So we might be able to take a look at, a specific property, a 4,000 square foot lot, maybe with a 3-family on it, and see if we can find a good example of one that's compliant. I think that would also be kind of compelling in terms of, what people might be able to expect if somebody was able to exercise the use of the zoning.
Yeah, that's great.
Your question, David, about West Gloucester Station, when I've just gone through it sort of lot by lot in the residency app and Map Geo, virtually all of those are undersized for R20. I don't, there might be a handful that need that, if any.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
8% non-compliant,
It
yeah,
was like between somebody.
yeah, it was really high.
And one other exercise, and I didn't want to distract this conversation tonight, but we kind of touched on it, and I don't have more smooth data to share with people, but I spent a couple of hours looking at the zoning board of appeals agendas from the most recent meeting back to December of 23. There were 28 items on those agendas for the last roughly 2 years. And again, these aren't, so we have 2-family by right, the 1 to 2, 2 to 3, ADUs, there's only 4 ADUs, which I thought was a low number. But again, if you're in front of the zoning board of appeals, you need to seek relief, 2-family by right, but you're on a compliant, you need relief for a by right use, right? And so almost every one of those, of course, it's zoning board of appeals, so why would it be someplace else? It's not going to be a building permit pulled. But just to sort of scratch that data a little bit and we can smooth it out a little bit more, not for, general consumption, but the idea was go and test what's happening today on the ground. Most everyone needed some form of relief in a by right use, and they're happening, right? So 2 to 3, 2 to 4, 1 to 2, 1 to 3, ADUs. So the mechanism that, the floodgates are going to open, they're still going to be caught up on the need for some sort of relief, right? And I think that's we talked about this,
Yep.
right? So I was surprised at how many things appeared on those agendas over that 2-year period. And I didn't, my next step was to sort of go and see what the permitting of those were, right? To get a sense of what is a 1 to 2, what is a 2 to a 3, or a 1 to 3 cost, right? And what does that really mean? What does it cost to, pull a building permit for an ADU, right? But again, just sort of, trying to really get a sense of what's happening in today's environment, what's different, how is it going to be different January 1st of 25? So, and it wasn't that cumbersome, but again, it's not, it's a distracting discussion. I mean, we're nearing the end, but I just thought it was interesting to sort of ground it in what's going on.
But I think what's
Great
important about
exercise.
that is that there's the fear of this opening up a floodgate, right?
Yes.
And that helps counteract that there's
Yes.
still a process involved.
And so the only other thing you would really need to do is look at building permits pulled for conversions in a by right use with no relief was needed,
Mhm.
right? And I guess that, and you could probably find that data, but it would probably take you 6 months, right? And the other thing that was curious is that, of course, you get a ZBA permit and, has the project started, right? So anyways.
I think another important thing for a public presentation, the last public forum we had, we heard from the public that they wanted to look all over Gloucester for, different districts. And I want to make sure that they understand, that the public understand that we went through the exercise of identifying different districts. We did identify Railroad Ave and decided that 40R is a better fit for them. We did identify, whatever Shaw's Plaza and Eastern Ave, but this again isn't the right fit. We did look at housing authority properties. We did, can't remember what else we looked at,
Lexington.
but Lexington Ave and Magnolia. And which wasn't a great fit because there was no sewer or because,
It's really the mandatory mixed use and how rigid those state regulations are.
right. So I just want the public to know that we did our work. We looked all over the place because as much as we've refined this, and I think this looks great, and I love the 15.18, density. We've almost come full circle, right? We've added West Gloucester, but we're back in the R5 and we're very specific about why and where and how and all of that stuff. But here we are again.
One area we haven't pursued that Greg and I talked a little bit about previously. I know we sort of discounted the
I deny.
we discounted the idea of the Eastern Avenue Shaw's Plaza because it's a more complicated
Right.
rezoning effort. But if you back up Eastern Avenue a little bit, there is I think it's an auto parts store and a welding
Yeah.
supply shop
The
that
tailor shop.
that would probably, I think, been a long time since I looked at it, but I think you could make a 5-acre district there. That, again, a metal auto parts store and an old, probably 30-year-old building that has welding supply tanks in it. More reasonable use might be 3-family units, and if we could do another district there, then again, I think that's another step to show that we are looking outside of the downtown area to the greatest degree possible. And it's not an area that would need as much work in terms of assessing and planning potential future uses, and you wouldn't have to do a mandatory mixed use either. You could zone it for 3-family development. And again, it would be another small district that's outside downtown.
Well, I think this process and hearing all of you go through all these different ideas has led to a lot of things that we can continue to work on moving forward. And utilizing that smart growth district may be the best thing to do. Eric actually identified today, there's a housing bond bill moving through the State House right now. It has a lot of policy attached to it. And there's a possibility that they may actually increase the amount of money that they would give cities and towns for adopting 40R smart growth districts. So if that happens, that could be even more impactful. But in that way, we're not doing something because the state's telling us to do it. We're actually doing it, and then the state's giving us money as a reward. And we have more flexibility to do it the way that makes sense for Gloucester. So we can certainly move forward with these other ideas. This isn't the end, you know, so.
Another thing is that, a lot of this is a paper exercise as opposed to a real exercise. Um, Understanding the drive behind MBTA stations, understanding the issues of these very prescriptive rules that we have to, box that we have to fit this into. We almost are doing some of those areas a disservice to put them in when, in fact, our timeline and the other ways of developing them, we just have now identified them and we just parking them until after this is done. So next year we can start to look at ways of doing that where it's not a paper exercise and where it's really a meaningful rezoning, upzoning or whatever that over time the market will support.
Yeah, I agree, but let's not lose sight of the fact that we are supporting the Gloucester Housing Authority if they choose to redevelop.
Yeah.
We are possibly getting some deed restricted affordable housing near the Halyard site.
Sure.
So there are some pieces of a part of this that's gonna help meet housing need here in Gloucester.
But also doing it within this box, whereas Railroad Avenue would be a mistake because it should be, it would be better in another. So in other words, those fit the box.
Right.
So, you know, we're picking and choosing, we're being judicious, but we're also trying to meet a deadline.
Yeah.
And then we could move on for these other ones.
And before I came here, I was working on 3A projects with several different communities and the same thing happened around mandatory mixed use, where they really wanted to include an area and redevelop it. But the way that the state is allowing for it just doesn't offer the flexibility to really do it the way that you want to. So it's happening for other communities too. And this is a massive state reform and we're working our way through it.
Well, I think this looks great. Thank you for this work, RKG.
Terrific, yeah.
Mhm.
So can we move forward with actually drafting regulations?
Yeah.
I mean, Chair, do we need to, or Greg, what do we need to do?
I think it would be if there was a motion to kind of identify that you'd like to move. And I mean, again, we showed you a little bit of a refined of last week and then the one that, you know, takes in a little bit more consideration of the things that were the original drivers for looking at the R5, that walk shed and the more of an opportunity within there. If you're comfortable with this scenario, then I would say, you know, let's have, you know, a motion that you'd like to move forward with the drafting of the zoning text to complete a full draft zoning amendment based on this scenario.
But before I move, is everyone done discussing? Is everybody in agreement at this point? Okay. Then I move that we move forward with the revised MBTA zoning compliance scenario as presented and have RKG and Innis Associates draft the zoning text to develop a complete draft zoning amendment for our review at our next meeting is the 8th. No, the 1st. No, to have it to us by the 1st so that we can talk about it on the 8th, right?
In advance of the 8th.
Yes,
Yep.
in advance of the 8th.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. I need a roll call vote, please.
You do?
Actually, you don't. I'm the only one out there.
But all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Okay, great.
Support this point.
Can I say something about this process that I found because I've been a planner for almost 40 years, that sometimes you start out with your 3 scenarios, which are just the point of departure, and it takes this kind of conversation and rethinking and out of that emerges an optimum solution that is the best it could possibly be. And I think that's what we did here with this joint effort that we've all engaged in. And I want to thank all of you. It's been really kind of fun to get here.
Well, subcommittee, thank the subcommittee.
Yeah.
Are we gonna have an opportunity to review the presentation before it's made to the public? Because I think in something like this, the method of presentation is key. So in terms of like the examples that Doug was talking about, just all of the sequencing of the plans and how this is presented, because it's complicated, right? If it's complicated for us, or I should say for me to understand, it's gonna be complicated for the public to understand as well. So,
You've got the tools, you've done the work, so
Yeah,
it's.
yeah.
Yeah.
but is that built into the schedule, Greg?
I mean, I think, you know, we have a couple of opportunities if we get through the text, and everybody's comfortable with a complete package, text and map. We are planning on, you know, targeting that forum, which I think in a lot of ways should be almost a dry run of, you know, how that will be presented also at the public hearing. So I think there's some opportunity to have a little bit of iteration of that to try to include, you know, some of the really good points that have been raised tonight in terms of, you know, really trying to paint the picture of what the potential impact is, what it would mean for, you know, for some of these specific examples. And, you know, and really, you know, again, I appreciate, David, you know, you providing some of the photographs that were used in that second forum, to really, you know, give people a sense of what we're actually talking about, you know, the fabric of the downtown right now as it is. And in some cases, you know, the example of Chestnut Street where it's more dense than we're zoning for, even in this scenario with the as of right perspective. So we can certainly try to do that. We do have, you know, if the stars are aligned, we also have a meeting on the 15th, you know, at which point we will be gearing up for the forum on the 21st. So we might have that opportunity in the timeline.
And our staff will give that a lot of thought and work with RKG to really communicate it well to the public and then bounce our ideas off of you and refine it.
Great, so if we get the draft language, you know, before the August 8th meeting in time to look at it, read it, I think at that point, Hank, just to get back to your height question, we'll be discussing design standards as we see the draft. And that will be parking and height and all of those kinds of things.
I think it's important that the public understands that the state is not trying to force us to build all these additional units. You know,
I've been saying that for 18 months, though. I don't.
it seems as though they still don't understand it.
Again, so
I mean, you know, you can say it over and over again, but you get this thing. I mean, when you think of all the disinformation that came out early on with these people putting these photographs of multi-story apartment buildings and things like that in, it was just, you know, and then people reacting to that. I mean, I just think that we need to be very clear that this is something we still control as to what goes into the whole thing. It's not just opening it up and forcing things in there.
that was kind of my point of doing a little
Of
bit of
course.
research on the
Yeah,
ZBA
that's it.
agendas.
Right.
And again, it's not a free for all, right? I mean, you know, show me, I mean, I built a house on a non-conforming lot and I needed 3 approvals, right, to tear a house down with a single.
I did too, I just did one too.
Right.
So
I
Alex-
saw yours.
Alex referred to this before, which is to talk about this as an opportunity. And I think flipping the narrative to show this, that this is an opportunity for the people who live within these districts. It's not a negative, it's a positive.
Yeah, it gives you more ability to do what you might want to do. And everyone knows, everyone here feels the housing crunch. I mean, young people, seniors that want to downsize, people who, you know, are essential workers and essential to the community, we're all feeling the crunch. So it's also going to help in that way.
Yeah, the other things you want to talk about? I think, I guess the other thing that I'd like to end this discussion tonight was that, and we say this a lot, at least I say it a lot, is that, and we've already touched on it a little bit, we've sort of come full circle, right? We started with something that was very complex, and a lot of, you know, angst and anxiety over it. And, you know, credit to our, you know, our consultants, but more so for the work that we've put in. We've gotten to a much better place, right? And it's We still have work to do, January 2nd of 25 to really, if we want to take that next step in housing production, we've really now have an intimate understanding of what the community looks like, what those impacts are. And if there is a call for more production, we know what our next steps are. But at the end of the day, I'm very proud of the work that we've done.
It sounds like we're unanimous, is that fair to say?
Mhm.
Which I think is an
I'm not gonna
important,
be here on the eighth, but you don't need to go one way or the other.
near unanimous, yes.
Thank you, Greg.
Yes,
Yeah.
Greg,
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you've done a great job. and-
No, I can't say enough how much I appreciate the subcommittee's work and your flexibility to take the time out of your busy lives to, put in the extra meetings. I mean, we've basically met every week and a lot of work in between. So I really appreciate the dedication of the board, and it's been great working with RKG. We're all talking like it's done, and it's not. But I think we're in a really good place. And I look forward to the next couple of months and bringing this project to completion, and to Rick's point, Sean's point, there's plenty of work to be done. And I think that's the silver lining I see really out of this process, is it's really identified some really good opportunities and projects to work on.
Agreed.
Seeing there's no further business, I'll offer a motion to adjourn.
second.
Motion in a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks.
to Eric and
Greg.
I have to say now, I can only laugh at what